Antonia Clarke had always been the kind of girl who believed that resilience was stitched into the fabric of her soul. Raised in the worn-down outskirts of Leeds, in a narrow two-bedroom flat that overlooked cracked streets and endless clouds, she learned early on that dreams were not given. They were earned with blood, thread, and sleepless nights. Her mother, Helena Clarke, was a seamstress who never made the covers of fashion magazines but created magic out of nothing. Scraps of velvet and lace became gowns fit for royalty under her hands. Helena was Antonia's lighthouse until cancer stole her away when Antonia was just 16. From that moment, fashion became more than a dream for Antonia. It became a mission. She poured herself into fabric studies, late-night sketches, and underground fashion forums. When the acceptance letter came from Thorne and Black, the crown jewel of the European fashion scene, it felt like fate had finally opened the door. But behind that luxurious invitation hid a darkness she could have never predicted. Her first day at Thorne and Black was drenched in awe and apprehension. The building itself was a fortress of glass and marble, cold and pristine. Models with impossible cheekbones walked past her with indifferent grace. Interns hustled like silent ghosts, but all whispers fell silent at the mention of one name: Maximilian Thorne. Maximilian wasn't just the heir to the empire, he was the empire. Son of the late Lord Richard Thorne, a British aristocrat with old money ties, and Anya Oliver, a former Russian ballerina turned fashion tycoon, Maximilian embodied danger dressed in bespoke Italian suits. Tall, with a jaw sculpted like a Greek, tragedy and ice-blue eyes that sliced through anyone who dared look too long. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and set fires without touching a single match. Antonia met him that same afternoon. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. The air changed when he entered. He observed her the way a lion might observe a gazelle, calculating, amused, dangerous. "You're the girl from Leeds," he said, as if her background were a disease. "Let's hope your hands are more talented than your postcode suggests." From that moment, the game began. Maximilian humiliated her in meetings, rejected designs she'd poured her soul into, and reassigned her sketches to more seasoned designers. But it wasn't just professional cruelty, it was personal. He whispered condescending remarks in passing, stood too close when no one was watching, and let his gaze linger where it shouldn't. And then came the kiss. It was late. The atelier was empty, lit only by the golden glow of industrial chandeliers. Antonia was pinning a prototype when she heard him behind her. She turned, startled, but before a word left her mouth, his hand brushed a lock of hair from her cheek and his lips pressed to hers. It wasn't affection, it was conquest, cold, controlled, calculated. When he pulled back, his whisper sent ice through her spine. "Now we're bound, Miss Clarke." She stood frozen, too stunned to speak. Was it a test, a warning, a threat? That night she didn't sleep. That night something in her broke and something else awoke. The next morning her sketches had vanished. The folder containing her next pitch, gone. In its place, another designer, Olivia Grafton, Maximilian's rumored lover, presented a strikingly similar design to the board. Antonia's protests were met with cold stares and gaslighting. "Maybe you left it at home," they said. "Maybe you're too stressed." But she knew better. Someone was orchestrating this, and it wasn't just Maximilian. Strange things began happening. Lights in her office flickered at odd hours. Anonymous messages appeared in her locker. "Run while you can." Her laptop was hacked. Photos of her childhood, of her mother, were printed and left on her desk with no explanation. And then came the dream journal. Buried inside her drawer, she found a small leather-bound book, not hers. Inside were pages filled with intimate descriptions of her movements, notes on what she wore, what she said, when she smiled. Someone was watching her. obsessively. Antonia realized she wasn't in a fashion house, she was inside a trap. The pressure mounted. Every meeting became a minefield. Olivia, once neutral, now smirked at her with venom. Other interns distanced themselves. The once warm, creative environment grew frigid. She felt it in every thread and fiber. Someone wanted to destroy her, but she didn't know why, until she found the file. Hidden deep within the company server, protected by layers of encryption, Antonia stumbled upon a digital folder named Athena. Inside were confidential reports, emails and photos of her, surveillance logs, a timeline that began long before her hiring. There were entries dating back years, referencing Helena Clarke, her mother, and a series of payments made to H. Clarke by Thorne and Black, the last entry. Termination processed, collateral damage acceptable. Her stomach dropped. The truth hit her like a freight train. Her mother hadn't simply worked for Thorne and Black. She had uncovered something worth silencing, something deadly. That kiss from Maximilian wasn't the beginning. It was the continuation of a cycle, a pattern. Antonia was never just another designer. She was a liability from the moment she walked through those doors, but now she knew, and now she would strike back. From that day forward, Antonia changed. She became deliberate, strategic. She played the game with the same ruthlessness she once feared. She smiled at Maximilian. She praised Olivia's stolen designs. She gathered information, allies, evidence, because she had one goal: burn the empire from the inside. If you're still watching, write in the comments. The truth always finds its voice. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it. Someone else needs to hear how Antonia turned from prey into predator. This is only the beginning. Whispers behind silk curtains. The fashion house's hidden war. From the outside, Thorne and Black remained the embodiment of perfection. Runway lights dazzled, models glided like ethereal beings, and the press raved about collections that redefined elegance. But behind the scenes, behind those polished marble floors and velvet-draped boardrooms, there pulsed a silent, invisible war. One that Antonia Clarke had now been drafted into without consent. Gone was the hopeful young designer who had stepped into the building weeks earlier. What remained was someone sharper, colder, and infinitely more aware of the darkness nestled in the corners of the empire. Antonia had uncovered just enough to know that every stitch, every accolade, was sewn over a graveyard of secrets. The file labeled Athena had revealed a horrifying link between her mother's mysterious death and the Thorne family legacy. It also confirmed what she had begun to suspect. Her presence at Thorne and Black was not coincidental, it was orchestrated. She had been chosen, watched, groomed even. But for what? Her instincts screamed one truth: she was being used. Or worse, she was the next target in a generational cycle of control and destruction. Maximilian's demeanor changed after she began to play along. He mistook her politeness for submission. His touches grew more frequent, his confidence bolder. But Antonia, now armed with rage and purpose, let him believe whatever he wanted. Beneath her calm exterior, she plotted. She began documenting everything, recording conversations, collecting keycards, noting employee routines, studying the surveillance systems. The deeper she went, the more she realized Maximilian wasn't the only enemy. In fact, he might not even be the most dangerous one. There was another presence. Elusive, hidden. Late one evening, Antonia stayed behind under the pretense of refining a design. With the atelier empty, she slipped into the archives, an off-limits section of the building known only to a handful of executives. There, in a locked drawer behind a false wall, she discovered physical documents the digital folder had hinted at. Internal memos, contracts, letters. Among them, one stood out. A signed agreement between Thorne and Black and a shadowy entity named the Circle of the Veil. The document was sealed with a blood-red wax insignia, a crest that sent shivers down her spine. It mentioned cleansing, legacies, protecting bloodlines, and removing unsanctioned variables. Her name appeared once, scrawled in ink, next to the phrase, "Daughter of Breach." Daughter of Breach. She barely had time to process when a voice sliced through the silence. "I wondered when you'd find your way here." It was Olivia. Antonia froze. The other woman stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the emergency light. Gone was the flirty smirk and runway confidence. Olivia looked tired, haunted. "You think I'm your enemy," she said softly, stepping into the room. "But you and I, we're the same. Just caught in different stages of the same game." Antonia didn't speak. Olivia nodded toward the folder in her hands. "They recruit talent like us, isolate us, break us down, and when we stop being useful, they erase us, quietly. You think your mother was the first? She wasn't, and unless you find a way out, you won't be the last." It was the first moment of genuine connection between them, the kind of whispered alliance that forms between survivors in a war zone. Over the next few weeks, Antonia and Olivia began to communicate through coded messages, meetings disguised as design critiques. They traced links between board members, unearthed footage of blacklisted models, and discovered a pattern in the deaths and disappearances, all tied to one purpose: maintaining the purity of the Thorne legacy. Maximilian, as it turned out, was a puppet. Dangerous, yes, but still manipulated by a higher hand. That hand revealed itself one night at a private fashion gala held in a remote French chateau. Antonia had been invited under the guise of showcasing a collaborative piece. The room was filled with aristocrats, art dealers, and fashion elites. But beneath the polished surface, something sinister lingered. Whispers of ancient societies, veiled threats hidden in toasts, and too many guests whose eyes were void of humanity. Then she saw him. A man older than time, seated beside Maximilian, with silver hair slicked back and a gaze that seemed to pierce through dimensions. Archibald Thorne, the Baron himself, Maximilian's grandfather, the true master of the house. He was supposed to be dead, and yet there he sat, smiling faintly, as if he'd been waiting for her. That night changed everything. Archibald didn't speak to Antonia. He didn't have to. His presence alone sent a message. This war went beyond corporate espionage. It was spiritual, ancestral, a battle of bloodlines and legacies. She was no longer just fighting for justice. She was fighting for her life, for her identity, and for every woman who had been devoured by this empire of shadows. Back in London, Antonia doubled down. She hacked into deeper levels of the Thorne servers, discovered rituals documented in cryptic files, and realized Thorne and Black wasn't just a brand. It was a front for power, for silence, for sacrifice. And they had chosen her for the next ritual. But Antonia wasn't going to run, not this time. She was going to burn it all down. If you've made it this far, comment below, even silk hides blood. And share this story. Let the world see what hides behind the glamour. The war has only just begun. For weeks after the gala in France, Antonia felt like she was walking through a distorted mirror of reality. Everything at Thorne and Black looked the same, glamorous, orderly, perfectly curated. But she knew better now. The glittering facade was nothing more than an exquisitely tailored illusion, designed to hide the decaying skeleton of a legacy built on manipulation, silence, and blood. And at the center of it all stood Archibald Thorne, the Baron everyone believed was long dead. Antonia's discovery of his survival and his looming influence over the entire empire shifted the battlefield. No longer was she merely navigating office politics or surviving Maximilian's cruel games. She was now facing a far more insidious machine. A dynasty that not only devoured talent, but erased lives and rewrote truths to protect its power. She began to see the patterns more clearly. Every star designer who had vanished suddenly, every model who had spoken out about abuse only to be blacklisted forever, every assistant who got promoted and was never seen again. They were all casualties of a masquerade that Antonia was now determined to rip apart, but she needed to be careful. Archibald Thorne didn't build an empire on charm alone. He had eyes everywhere, and worse, he had loyalists, people who believed in the legacy more than in morality, people who would do anything to protect the name, the brand, the bloodline. And Maximilian? He had become erratic since the gala, once calculating and cruel. Now he seemed increasingly desperate. He would arrive at the office at strange hours, sometimes drunk, sometimes furious, and once completely silent, a cut on his cheek, blood staining his pristine shirt. He avoided Antonia's gaze. She could sense the unraveling, but she also knew desperate men were dangerous, especially men like him. Raised with unchecked power and no consequences, it was during this tense silence that Antonia received an unexpected message, slipped under her door in a black envelope, sealed with the same red wax as the circle of the Veil documents. Inside was a single line typed on thick ivory paper. If you want to understand the masquerade, meet me where her ashes were scattered. No name, no date. But Antonia didn't need one. Her mother's ashes had been scattered. In Yorkshire, near an abandoned chapel Helena used to visit when things became unbearable. Antonia knew the place like the back of her hand. She traveled that night. The chapel was cold and silent, wind slicing through broken glass windows, ivy choking the old stone. She waited, heart pounding, the memory of her mother pressing heavy against her chest. Then, from the shadows, a woman stepped forward. Her face was familiar, pale, angular. She had once graced the covers of Vogue. Arabella Wynne, an icon of the late 2000s fashion world, declared dead after a tragic accident over a decade ago. Yet here she was, very much alive. Arabella explained everything. She had been in Antonia's place once, a rising star, admired, celebrated. Then she saw too much, heard whispers she wasn't supposed to, refused to obey. She tried to run. They faked her death and buried the truth beneath headlines and memorials. They own everything, Arabella said. Media, courts, doctors, even time. But they can't erase us if we stay hidden. She had been watching Antonia, hoping she'd either survive or expose them. Now it seemed she had done both. Arabella handed her a USB drive. This has names, dates, payments, locations, enough to bring them down if you know where to send it, but be careful. Once you use this, there's no going back. Antonia returned to London with the drive clutched tight in her coat. She didn't sleep. For days she debated what to do. Sending it to the press could work, but what if they were bought off? Going to the police, a risk. Too many had already disappeared that way. She needed something more secure, more undeniable. She needed to unmask the masquerade publicly, live undeniable, catastrophic. The opportunity came in the form of the annual Thorne and Black Winter Gala, a live-streamed, internationally viewed celebration of fashion's elite. Maximilian would be presenting the new collection. The world would be watching. Antonia made her choice. She worked tirelessly, inserting encrypted code into the live stream software, planting subtle messages into the video projections, rewriting captions that would appear in real time. Olivia helped. Quietly, Arabella remained in the shadows, guiding her digitally. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom was draped in opulence. Cameras surrounded the stage. Celebrities mingled. Champagne flowed like rivers. Maximilian stepped onto the runway in a charcoal suit, smiling like a serpent about to strike. Then it began. The screens flickered. For a moment, everything froze. Then a video began playing. It started with archival footage. Antonia's mother, at work in a dusty studio. then overlaid with documents, photographs, surveillance tapes, models crying, designers shouting, contracts with redacted lines and hidden clauses, payments, disappearances. Finally, a photo of Archibald Thorne, time-stamped only a week earlier, laughing beside an unconscious model. The room erupted into chaos, screams, shouting. Maximilian tried to kill the feed, but Antonia had locked it. Everything streamed live. Across the world, millions watched as the glamorous empire crumbled before their eyes. Backstage, Maximilian confronted her. "You don't know what you've done," he hissed, blood rising in his face. "Oh, Antonia," said voice calm, "I know exactly what I've done." She walked away as security dragged him off the stage. The masquerade was over. If you're still watching, comment below. Empires built on lies will always fall. And don't forget to share this story. The truth must never wear a mask again. The fallout was immediate and merciless. The moment the live stream ended, the world exploded. News outlets scrambled to confirm what they had just broadcasted. Social media ignited with outrage and disbelief. Hashtags like Thorne Empire Exposed and Fashion House of Horrors trended globally. Fashion magazines released decades of buried stories within hours, and suddenly, the untouchable became vulnerable. The kingdom of Thorne and Black, once a shimmering symbol of elegance, now stood stained by its own sins. But for Antonia Clarke, the victory came at a cost far higher than she'd ever imagined. The morning after the gala, she awoke not to applause, but to silence. Her apartment had been broken into, her laptop and all physical evidence gone. Her phone, dead. Every call she tried to make was blocked. Olivia's number disconnected. The world had watched her take down an empire, but now she was alone in the ruins, and the empire had begun to rebuild faster than anyone thought possible. That same day, a warrant was issued for her arrest. The charges were false, fabricated, data theft, corporate espionage, defamation. They painted her as a rogue intern with delusions of grandeur and a vendetta against the company that had taken her in. Within hours, every news outlet that had once praised her bravery now reported with suspicion. Headlines turned cold, doubt spread like wildfire, and Maximilian Thorne released without charges. The footage inconclusive, the evidence doctored. Antonia had expected retaliation, but not this fast, not this brutal. She went underground, no safe house, no allies. Arabella Wynne had vanished again. Olivia was presumed dead. Her flat burned in what was ruled an electrical accident. Antonia knew better. She also knew she wouldn't be next. No, they needed her alive, but silenced. In exile, she moved city to city, taking shelter in abandoned warehouses, safe apartments owned by old-fashioned contacts who owed her mother favors. But everywhere she turned, she felt the empire's reach. Anonymous black SUVs outside buildings, drones hovering at windows, packages that buzzed with tracking devices. The Thorne name wasn't just powerful, it was omnipresent. And then came the message, an untraceable email. No sender, no subject, just a single sentence. Truth has a price. Yours is still unpaid. She stared at the screen for hours. Rage, fear, determination. They swirled in her like poison and fuel. If they wanted her to stop, they should have killed her. Instead, they reminded her she was still alive and dangerous. So she began to fight back, not with the elegance of exposés or live streams, but from the shadows, digitally, silently, strategically. Using the remaining contacts she could trust, she seeded new information into forums, leaked evidence to rogue journalists, and uploaded anonymous files to dark web archives. She created a decentralized network of whistleblowers, each passing information along without knowing the full picture. She became folklore, the mistress of the masquerade, a ghost story whispered among fashion insiders, a myth that carried too much truth to ignore. And it worked. Every week, a new story surfaced. A disgraced board member confessed. A designer fled the country and spoke out. Archives once thought destroyed appeared on encrypted servers. The Thorne legacy began to fracture, not from a headline, but from 1,000 cracks made by a woman they couldn't kill. Still, the danger grew. One night in a safe house in Berlin, she found a photo slipped under her door. It was her mother, Antonia Clarke, tied to a chair, eyes open, mouth gagged. The photo was dated 2 days earlier. Impossible. Her mother had died, or so she believed. She stared at the photo for hours, then flipped it over. Written in the same crimson ink used in the Thorne contracts, a message. Not everything you buried is dead. She knew then what they were doing. They were trying to break her, mind first, then body. She'd humiliated them, exposed their rot. But their power wasn't just political or financial, it was psychological. They specialized in rewriting realities, and they were now writing a new one for her. She flew to Leeds the next morning, to the crematorium, to the archives, to the place where her mother's ashes were stored. Everything had been erased, the records, the witnesses, even the cemetery plots had been reassigned. It was as if Antonia Clarke had never existed. In the weeks that followed, Antonia fell into a spiral of paranoia and grief. What if the woman in the photo wasn't her mother? What if she had never truly known the truth? Had her entire mission been built on a lie? Was she just another manipulated pawn? But as she stared at her own reflection in a cracked mirror inside another nameless safe house, she remembered her mother's words. Words spoken softly in the late hours of the night when the world felt too heavy. If they ever try to take everything from you, darling, just remember, fire cleanses. Antonia lit a match. She burned every photo, every file, every artifact that could tie her to the past. Not to erase it, but to make it harder for them to use against her. She would become smoke, flame, memory. They couldn't kill what they couldn't find, and they couldn't stop what they couldn't predict. She was done reacting. Now she would go on the offensive. If you've stayed with this story, comment, she became the fire and spread this tale because some truths once revealed demand to keep burning. They say when you have nothing left to lose, you become unstoppable. Antonia Clarke had reached that edge. No name, no home, no allies the world could recognize. Only rage, intelligence, and a story that refused to die. Her image had been publicly destroyed, her reputation stained by lies whispered by men in velvet suits and red wax seals. But behind those layers of ash and betrayal, a weapon had taken shape, sharp, precise, and ready to strike. She no longer wandered from safe house to safe house like a fugitive. She moved like a ghost through the systems of her enemies, through their data, their servers, their digital skeletons. The fire she had once ignited with emotion was now cold, methodical. She studied patterns, traced financial trails, hacked into encrypted archives not to leak, but to learn, to plan. And what she discovered next would change everything. Buried within an offshore archive, hosted in a forgotten jurisdiction, she found a vault of video footage labeled Inheritance Protocols. Dozens of hours of initiation ceremonies, meetings, of masked individuals, oaths sworn in languages long dead. These weren't simply rituals, they were evidence of something older than Thorne and Black itself. A secret order, one that predated the fashion house by generations. They called themselves the Circle of the Veil, and their mission had always been the same: preservation of power through concealment, subjugation, and control of influence. Fashion was never the end. It was the camouflage. Antonia watched in silence as one particular file played. A young Maximilian, barely 18, kneeling before his grandfather in a candlelit chamber. Archibald Thorne, cloaked in ceremonial garments, recited ancient verses and then pricked the boy's finger with a silver blade. The blood dripped into a crystal chalice. Behind them, observers, familiar faces from the industry, CEOs, editors, politicians, all silent witnesses to the birth of another heir to power. Antonia had confirmation now. This was no longer a personal war. This was a systemic cleansing, a purge, and it had to begin from the top. She created a new identity, a new face, a new voice. She became Celine Vex, an enigmatic French fashion consultant with a reputation forged in weeks through manipulated algorithms, digital press, and artificial virality. She booked meetings, charmed designers, infiltrated galas. The name Celine opened doors Antonia never could. Behind the mask of wealth, she walked freely among the very wolves who once hunted her. Her goal wasn't to leak documents or expose rituals. Her goal was infiltration. Using her new identity, she manipulated key players, planting seeds of doubt, sparking paranoia among Thorne and Black's board members. She arranged anonymous tips to journalists, hinting at betrayals from within. Executives began to turn on each other. Rumors of spies and double crosses rippled through the upper ranks. The empire began to crumble from the inside, but it wasn't enough. Antonia needed one final move, one last play to collapse the foundation entirely. She discovered that Thorne and Black's financial backbone was tied to a hidden vault, a literal underground facility beneath an estate in the Scottish Highlands. It housed original manuscripts, blood-bound contracts, and most importantly, the Book of Names. A ledger said to hold every member of the circle for over 2 centuries. Names of kings, judges, icons, many still active. Destroy the book and the circle would be untraceable. Steal the book and every ally they ever had could be exposed. The heist would require precision, betrayal, and something more dangerous than hacking or disguise: trust. So she turned to someone she swore she never would, Maximilian Thorne. She didn't contact him directly. She let him find her. He was spiraling, his public image shattered, his inheritance in question, and the empire now divided under whispers of his incompetence. She knew he would take the bait, and he did. They met in Venice at the masquerade ball of a rival fashion house. He wore his mask, gold, ornate, arrogant. She wore hers, black lace, emotionless. When they spoke, it was civil. When they danced, it was like knives in rhythm. "I want to help you," she said. Maximilian laughed. "You destroyed me." "No," she replied. "I destroyed a lie. What comes next? That's your choice." He watched her closely. For the first time, uncertain, vulnerable, human, she leaned in. "Help me steal the book, and I'll give you the one thing your grandfather never did." "What's that?" he asked. She didn't blink. A future. That night an alliance was formed, unholy, temporary but powerful. The plan was executed over 7 days. Antonia, still Celine, created a diversion in Paris, leaking a forged scandal implicating several board members in trafficking schemes. While the circle panicked, she and Maximilian infiltrated the Scottish estate under the guise of conducting an exclusive fashion interview with Lord Archibald's private historian. What happened next was chaos wrapped in elegance, alarms, fire. Betrayal. Maximilian fled with the book. Antonia stayed behind and lit the vault ablaze. But she had made one copy, one encrypted digital version. Now, she held the key to 2 centuries of secrets, and the world would never see her the same again. If you're still here, comment below. She played the game and rewrote the rules. And share this story, because even empires built in silence can be unmade by a single whispering shadow. The Scottish sky bled crimson as flames devoured the vault. Antonia watched from the cliff's edge, her silhouette framed by the roaring inferno that once held centuries of secrets. Inside that infernal blaze, Contracts, rituals, and names that dictated the fate of empires, were reduced to ash. The fire licked the heavens as if trying to purge the world of the sins it had hidden for so long. But the real weapon had already escaped the blaze. Encrypted, duplicated, protected in a quantum vault only she could access. Antonia now held the most powerful ledger in modern history, the Book of Names, and with it the power to dismantle every facet of the Circle's influence. Judges, politicians, fashion moguls, royal bloodlines. Their alliances, their crimes, their oaths, all documented in chilling detail, and yet holding that power didn't feel like victory. It felt like damnation. Maximilian had disappeared after the heist, vanishing without a word. Whether he ran from her, from the Circle, or from himself, Antonia didn't know. And frankly, she no longer cared. What had once been vengeance had evolved into something far more dangerous. Legacy. But the Circle wasn't defeated. No, it was. Wounded, and wounded predators don't flee. They retaliate. The first blow came as whispers. Global media began spinning a new narrative. The Book of Names was a fabrication, a sophisticated hoax orchestrated by a disgraced former intern. With a history of psychological instability, psychiatric records appeared online, doctored to paint Antonia as delusional. Old video footage was re-edited to show her in erratic, incoherent interviews. They didn't just want to silence her, they wanted to erase her from credibility, from history, from existence. The second blow was physical. Arabella Wynne was found dead. Her body washed up on the shores of the Adriatic, throat slit, fingers broken, clearly tortured. But the autopsy reported it as death by drowning. Olivia's name resurfaced briefly in a report linking her to an arson case in Prague. But no body was ever found. Antonia suspected the worst. She was running out of time and allies. She went underground again, this time deeper. Changing identities became second nature. Her face was altered with microsurgery, her voice modulated, her digital footprint wiped. She was no longer Antonia Clarke. She became only the Mistress. From the shadows, she released the names, one by one. Each week, a new chapter of the Book of Names was published anonymously through decentralized platforms. Each leak was followed by a storm, resignations, arrests, disappearances. And with every revelation, the Circle's mask slipped further. Then came the final name, Archibald Thorne. The leak included not just his rituals, but footage of him orchestrating murders, binding contracts in blood, and declaring open warfare on whistleblowers. It was irrefutable, it was damning, it was the spark, and the world ignited. Thorne and Black's shares plummeted to historic lows. Their brand was pulled from major fashion weeks. The British aristocracy distanced themselves, claiming ignorance. International warrants were issued, and for the first time in over a century, the Thorne name brought not prestige, but shame. But Archibald was not a man who surrendered. He made one last move. He appeared live, broadcasting from a hidden location to declare war. Dressed in ceremonial black, surrounded by loyalists, he spoke of purification, of ancient order, of bloodline restoration. He denounced the Mistress as an abomination, a symbol of rebellion that must be crushed. He offered a bounty, £10 million for her capture, alive or dead. Antonia watched from a safe house in Norway, her hand shaking as she clutched. The last encrypted drive, the final layer of secrets, the genesis of the Circle. The truth that could destroy the very myth of aristocracy in Europe. But releasing it meant total war, not just against the Thornes, but against the foundation of modern power. She had a choice, to finish what she started, or to vanish forever and live. That night, she stared at her reflection, a face no longer hers, in a world no longer recognizable. She thought of her mother, of Arabella, of Olivia, of every voice silenced so that monsters could dress themselves in elegance and rule without consequence. And then she whispered to the darkness, "Let the final bloodline break." She uploaded the final file. Every nation, every system, every citizen with a screen would see it. The story of a dynasty born in shadows, thriving in silence, and destroyed by the woman they tried to erase. If you're still here, comment, "She ended what they began in blood," and share this story, because legacies built on betrayal deserve no heirs. The world burned, not with fire but with truth. The final release of the Book of Names struck with the force of 1,000 detonations. Courtrooms overflowed. Aristocratic families scrambled to protect what remained of their crumbling legacies. Government officials resigned mid-sentence on live television. Celebrities went dark, their affiliations with the Thorne dynasty now poisoned. What had once been a fashion house had become ground zero for an unraveling elite. And at the center of the storm, unseen but omnipresent, stood the one they called the Mistress. Antonia Clarke was gone. That name, that identity, had been buried beneath betrayal and reborn in vengeance. In her place existed only myth, a digital ghost, a whispered warning, a symbol etched into walls and screens across continents. A black lace mask, a trail of justice in the ruins of power. But myth alone wouldn't rebuild what had been shattered. She knew that. So as the world tore itself apart, Antonia prepared the next phase. Not destruction, but resurrection. Not for herself, but for the silenced, the buried, the forgotten. She founded the Archive of the Unseen, a decentralized platform accessible to anyone, anywhere, to submit stories, evidence, testimonies. Survivors of abuse, victims of systemic control, whistleblowers with nowhere left to go. The archive became a haven, not just for justice, but for truth without curation. A mirror to the world, unfiltered, unafraid. And slowly, new voices emerged. Designers, once erased, came forward with collections inspired by resilience. Journalists formed alliances beyond the reach of corrupted networks. Institutions that had once knelt before money began to fracture, replaced by grassroots movements powered not by fear, but fury and memory. Meanwhile, the circle of the veil withered. With their ledger exposed and their rituals broadcast to billions, no corner of the earth remained untouched. Archibald Thorne was last seen in a grainy photo fleeing the Czech Republic. Rumors claimed he had died. Others believed he still operated in the shadows, a phantom licking wounds, waiting. Antonia didn't care. The world no longer belonged to shadows. It belonged to survivors, but her personal war wasn't done. One last name lingered in her encrypted archives, a name she had refused to confront, until now, Maximilian Thorne. She traced him to Marrakesh, where he lived under a false identity, hiding in plain sight among art dealers and aging aristocrats. She didn't go there with vengeance, she went with closure. They met in a rooftop garden at sunset. He aged 10 years in less than 2. No arrogance remained, only a man whose bloodline had finally poisoned him from the inside. "You won," he said, eyes hollow. "You destroyed everything." Antonia tilted her head. "No, I revealed it. You destroyed it long before I arrived." He nodded, said nothing for a long time. Then he handed her a single item, a locket. Inside it, a photo, her. Mother smiling, holding baby Antonia. "She loved you," he murmured. Even when we chose the dark." Antonia held the locket close. For the first time in years, tears came, not from grief but from release. She turned to leave. "Will you ever stop?" Maximilian called out. She paused. Then, without turning back, she said, "No, because truth doesn't sleep." That night, the final message appeared across every screen on the planet. A legacy once built on silence has been rewritten in screams. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. If you're still watching, comment below. She became the legacy they never expected. And share this story, for in every whisper of injustice, there lives a mistress ready to rise. They tried to silence her. They tried to erase her. They tried to bury her beneath centuries of secrets, blood oaths, and aristocratic rot. But Antonia Clarke, now only remembered by those who truly knew, rose from the ashes not as a victim, nor as a fugitive, but as a sovereign of truth. The world changed in the wake of her war. No longer did the Thorne name command reverence. It evoked reckoning. The once imperial Thorne and Black brand had been dissolved, its assets seized, its board imprisoned or vanished. The circle of the veil, which once whispered commands that shaped nations, was scattered to the wind like dry leaves before a storm. But the mistress did not stop at justice. She envisioned something greater, something untouched by corruption. A sanctuary where no voice would be silenced, no survivor forgotten, no dream consumed by power-hungry hands. From the chaos, she began to build. She founded the Ember Court, not a brand, not a corporation, a movement, a global collective of artists, designers, hackers, journalists, and warriors. People whose stories had once been smothered beneath velvet curtains and gilded lies. The Ember Court launched with no press release, no red carpet, only a single broadcasted manifesto read by a digitized voice through a black screen. We are the flames they couldn't extinguish. We are the voices they buried in silk and gold. We are the court of the broken, and we are taking back the world. Within weeks, Ember installations bloomed across New York, Tokyo, Berlin, Johannesburg. Street art fused with fashion, protest. Banners became couture statements. Each collection told a story, not of models, but of revolution. And at the heart of it all, unseen but always present, was her mark. A black lace mask stitched with threads of fire. She never appeared in public. Not once, and that absence made her more powerful than any figure alive. Governments tried to track her. Corporations offered fortunes to unmask her. Conspiracy theorists called her an AI, a ghost, a divine punishment. But the people, those who had once been voiceless, knew the truth. She was one of them, and she had won. In the years that followed, the Ember Court reshaped not just fashion, but justice. Its influence spilled into tech, journalism, education. Victims of systemic abuse found platforms. Underground whistleblower networks flourished. Survivors who once hid behind closed doors now wore their scars like armor, beautiful, unapologetic, untouchable. And yet, through all of it, Antonia remained in the shadows, not because she was afraid, but because symbols are more powerful than people, and she had become one. She lived on the move, sometimes in Icelandic cabins powered by geothermal heat, other times in hidden havens carved beneath the foundations of old cities. She no longer wore disguises. She no longer needed to. The world she had helped create offered her the one thing no empire of blood had ever given: peace. But her story did not fade. It became scripture. Schools studied it. Activist groups invoked it. Artists painted murals that stretched over broken buildings. Every generation that followed asked the same question: who was the mistress? Some said she was a fallen heiress seeking revenge. Others believed she was a collective of minds who used a fictional figure to destabilize the elite. But the truth? The truth was written in fire and remembered by those who had been saved by it. One day, years after the revolution, a girl in Morocco opened a dusty trunk passed down through generations. Inside was a black mask, aged but intact, and a note, faded with time, for the next one, when they rise again, burn brighter. If you're still watching this video, you are part of something greater now. Write in the comments, "The fire never dies." And share this story, because someone, somewhere, is living in silence, waiting for a voice like yours to remind them they can rise.